I think you can start, Stuart.
Oh, very well. Thank you, Roger. My name is Stuart Urton. I'm the senior business writer for Civil Beat. And we're here tonight discussing tourism with a great panel of experts. The name of the discussion is Transforming Hawaii Tourism. And we'll spend about an hour with presentations from, again, three esteemed experts on tourism in Hawaii, then open things up for questions and a conversation. We'll kick things off with Kalani Kaana'ana. He is the Chief Brand Officer for the Hawaii Tourism Authority. And would like to just start, Kalani, if you could tell us just in a few words, a minute or so, what you do exactly.
Sure. Aloha, everyone. I'm the Chief Brand Officer at the Hawaii Tourism Authority, and I have the new responsibility, because it's a new position that was created in July, of really integrating our 4 strategic pillars, which include our natural resources, Hawaiian culture, community, and branding. And so how do I bring all of those 4 things together as we move toward a more regenerative tourism model in Hawaii? So really, it's the integration of 4 pillars that I think is my focus. Thanks.
Great. And we also have Frank Haas. He's president of Marketing Management Incorporated and is the former director of marketing for the Hawaii Tourism Authority. Frank, can you tell us what you, a little bit about what you do every day?
Aloha. I'm very involved with the whole issue of destination management. I've been doing workshops and writing about that. We've written in conjunction with Paul Brubaker and Jim Mack some papers that are at the University of Hawaii Economic Research Office. And I've been doing training in the area. Most recently, interestingly enough, in Bandung, West Java, which is interested in creating a very robust tourism management program.
Great. And Professor Pauline Sheldon, Professor Emerita from the University of Hawaii's School of Travel Industry Management, also the founder of some Tourism Education Futures Initiative, and on the advisory board of Hawaii Green Growth. Thank you for joining us. Can you tell us a bit about what you do every day?
Thank you, Stuart. Good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm retired, but I've continued to be professionally active. I'm writing quite a number of things about designing tourism differently, particularly anything to do with transformative tourism. I'm currently pulling together a volume from writers from around the world where they're describing what's going on in their destinations with these regenerative tourism principles. I also work with PhD students around the world and do other fun things as well because I'm retired.
Terrific. Well, we'll follow up with you later on all this work. But for now, we only have an hour. So Kalani, can you start? I know you have a presentation for us. Can you start showing us what you've got and telling us about what you're doing?
Absolutely. So I just want to start by prefacing, I dropped a few links in the chat. They may be helpful for you to reference both while I'm speaking and after we're done, but I wanted to share that first. And I'm going to go ahead and share screen here. All right, going to go into full screen mode. Thanks. Can everybody see this okay?
Got it.
Awesome. Really, I wanted to start with our vision, and quite simply, it can be summarized in 3 words. Malama ku'uhome. How do we care for our beloved home? It really is the vision that we have from John DeFries, our president and CEO, who sends his regrets tonight. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us, so I'm here. And I'm happy to carry the message for him that we all believe in at the HTA, which is how do we do this? How do we transition what we've known in the past to this? It really started in January of last year with our tourism strategic plan being adopted by our board of directors in January of 2020, just before the pandemic began. And what it did is it stunted a little bit of the rollout that we were taking to do with this plan and get it out into communities to share it. We had reached out to the community before that and made sure that we had gone to every island and addressed a number of stakeholders in its formation. But also we wanted to make sure that we had a time to roll it out with our community. And so the strategic plan, I think at that time really was based on 4 interacting pillars: our natural resources, Hawaiian culture, community, and brand marketing, all underlined by this idea of responsible tourism. Of course, we know the pandemic happened and we saw what devastating effects that had for the industry and the globe really. But what it allowed us to do was to take a moment of pause and to really reevaluate and understand what the needs of our community were. We did a lot of thinking and really as a team said, hey, how do we engage our communities so that their voice can be heard? We do a resident sentiment survey that's been done for a number of years. And in most recent years, one of the main things that's come out of it is residents felt like they wanted to have a greater voice in tourism's development. And so what we tried to do was to create a process to come out with what we're calling destination management action plans. And so we went out across the state again to solicit feedback from community members and stakeholders about what that is and how we do that. I think fundamentally though, the biggest shift is in our thinking and it's how do we transition, responsible tourism into regenerative tourism. And I'm going to let Pauline share about that later on. But really, how do we balance the economics of tourism and the well-being of our communities and natural resources? And so really, that's the focus that we've taken. We know that we have a number of goals as a state. Hawaii Tourism Authority is a state agency. And so we're aligned behind the governor and the legislature in the adoption of the Aloha Plus Challenge and its 6 local goals. We know that we have sustainable development goals at a global level. And so how do we then think about local implementation of these SDGs here locally? But we also know that tourism can be catalytic. We know tourism can be a force for good. I know oftentimes people see tourism as the impediment or the antithesis of progress or being able to diversify our economy into areas like agriculture and others. But actually, we believe that tourism can actually be catalytic in this effort. I want to kind of double down a little bit on the destination management action plans. They've all been published now, including Oahu most recently in August. There is a plan for each island, including Lanai and Molokai, that are contained within the Maui Nui plan. And really what they do is they have anchor actions. And the anchor actions are sort of your top level big actions. And then there are sub actions below each of those that are more specific. And so I'm not Caroline Anderson, but I did borrow her slides tonight to walk us through some of this. A big part of the DMAPS planning is making sure that we can track progress. These are not plans that are meant to sit on a shelf. They're meant to be implemented and are being implemented now. And so tracking our implementation is really important. And you folks can do that. I shared some of the links to that. You can check the progress there. I want to just share that, each island, these are Kauai's DMAP actions. These are some of the phase 1 actions that are already underway and in progress. We know we've highlighted some of this work already, and I'm going to zoom through these slides, and I'm happy to share this later if folks want to dig deeper. But you can see that, again, these actions are taking place now. They're already happening. These are Maui's anchor actions that have been identified by community. Again, this is the actions that we're taking now that are in progress right now. 23 of the sub-actions are in phase 1 that are in progress. We've already completed 1. So we're moving. We're not going to sit on our laurels with this stuff. Again, more highlights, whether it's Native Hawaiian hospitality, the shuttle programs, our convening of various state, federal, and county partners to address things on the road to Hana as a hotspot on Maui. Just a few examples. And so Molokai, same thing. I'm just going to roll through this. Lanai, same thing. It's all happening. The highlights are there. And we're going to continue to do this. Hawaii Island. The only one that hasn't really begun yet is the island of Oahu. Sorry, my slides went too quick. The island of Oahu just got published, and so we've already started some of them, but obviously this is a lot fresher for us. I also want to talk about some of the emphasis that we've put in making sure that we've expanded our team on each island. So we've hired destination managers on Oahu and Maui, and are expecting to hire Kauai and Hawaii Island soon. But these staff, Catherine, Megan, and the others that are coming on board have the responsibility to engage community and to see that these actions are implemented on their islands. So really taking an island by island approach. One of the criticisms of HTA has been that we've been Oahu centric. And so what we're really trying to do is be responsive to that. And this is one of the means that we're taking to do that. How can you get involved? Read your island's DMAP, help with the actions. If you have a community organization or something that you can help forward, move forward on these initiatives, we definitely invite you. And so the email there down at the bottom, communityprograms@gohta.net, is certainly some way you can reach out to us to get involved. Now, I want to talk a little bit about our brand marketing. It's one that's often contentious. People say, why do we need to continue to promote the Hawaiian Islands? And rather, what I really want to do is kind of redefine in our minds the work that we do in branding. For a long time, the Hawaiian Islands have been positioned as playground and paradise, sun, sand, and surf. But we know Hawaii is so much more than those things. And so what we've tried to do is lay out this framework that has a number of different wedges that collectively we believe sort of start to address what it means to be a destination management and marketing organization, which is more holistic, which is in alignment with regenerative tourism. So how do we make sure that we amplify the positive effects of tourism while we mitigate the negative ones, but taking into account the holistic nature of what we do? And so we try to reach visitors at every level that we can, from their pre-travel planning and pre-decisional planning, right through booking, and our partners from airlines and hotels allow us to share this message of malama with our visitors in their confirmation emails and stuff like that. We also follow them through on the airplane. We have in-flight videos. They're not mandatory, but we believe that this holistic strategy of pre-travel planning all the way through when they get here is really more effective in multiple touch points with that visitor instead of that one point in time video. But we know that they're watching the in-flight video, and then we also follow them into the airport. There's new messaging going down the escalators to baggage claim and at the baggage claim, again with this Malama Hawaii messaging. And then I think our biggest intervention is through paid social. So when they're on the island, we can target them as an audience and really try to place those messages of Kuleana and travel pono, those tips that we can place in front of visitors on how to travel pono and act responsibly while they're in the islands, really is one way that we can do that. And so happy to sort of talk through some of this later on, but I do want to reserve a bunch of time so we can answer questions and have good conversation. And maybe I'll just close my portion real quick, if I can, with an example of this work. And really what I want to show is that it's not the marketing that I think most people know the HTA for. And so I just want to show a 1-minute clip here real quick. Thanks so much, everyone. Stuart, I think you're muted.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much for the presentation. We will get back to you with questions. And next, we'd like to talk to Dr. Sheldon. She has a presentation for us. Without any further introduction, please, Dr. Pauline Sheldon, let us know what you're.
Can you see the screen and hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
So I'd like to begin by congratulating Roger and the festival for having this panel. It's such an urgent, critical topic, and I think it's so good that they've added it into the festival. And you know, every time I hear Kalani and John speak, I get goosebumps. They're doing exactly what's needed to transform tourism. They just need the support to get it done. Okay, so what I would like to do is just share a few ideas about how destinations around the world are looking at this need to transform tourism, because, you know, we've all been through the whiplash of over-tourism and then no tourism, and, you know, how do we come out of this? What thinking is going to help us to do that? How can we rethink it? And I read a quote from Arundhati Roy a number of months ago, and this sort of set me thinking. She talked about how pandemics, all of them are the same, and they create like a portal between one world and the next. And I think that's how we all feel, right? You know, where are we going? But what she said is that, you know, we have an option. We can walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our avarice and dead ideas behind us, or we can walk through lightly with little luggage and allowing us to imagine another world. And so when I read this, I thought, with tourism, what is it that we need to let go of? What is the luggage we have to kind of abandon so we can transform to a better tourism moving forward? And I came up with the following thoughts. First of all, I think the old economic system upon which most modern tourism in Hawaii and around the world is based upon is crumbling, the neoliberalism, right? It's not working for us anymore. It was given to us after Second World War, and it was responsible for a lot of the development, but it's based on some assumptions that are not serving society anymore. Assumptions that self-interest drives ideal human behavior. We know that's not true, right? We know that philanthropy and altruism is certainly happening more. We know that more income doesn't necessarily mean more happiness. Yes, to a point, but that's not the goal. Competition is not the only way for economic progress, which is what the neoliberals thought. You know, we can look at collaborative networks and make a lot of progress that way. The idea that markets are fair and prices actually tell the truth, that's not true. We've got so much misinformation now, we really don't know what's going on. And finally, so true for tourism, tends to encourage consumption for its own sake, right? And so as I looked at these, I thought, this is what has to crumble. This is one of the things that we really need to leave behind. The other thing that I think we need to ditch before we go through into the new tourism is this addiction that we have to growth, right? Kate Rayworth, who's going to talk tomorrow, I think she'll probably address this. In tourism, we're so used to seeing these exponential curves, and that absolutely cannot continue. We have a finite planet, we have a finite island chain, and we cannot do that. And so the way I look at it is like tourism is finally coming of age. We've moved from adolescence and we're getting into maturity. And rather like the human being, you know, there's a physical growth that takes place for 18, 20 years, whatever. And then at that point, the physical growth stops and the energy in the system goes to developing subtler and more refined things, belief systems, morale, but most importantly, at maturity, there is a sense of responsibility that comes. And so we have to drop our focus on growth in arrivals and expenditure in the same way that in economics, we have to drop GDP as our metric, right? And instead focus on increased responsibility, increased well-being, for people and ecosystems. And this is what Kalani and John are already doing, but this is just the background. So if we drop our addiction to growth, we drop the neoliberal economic model, then what? Well, then what we have to do, I think, is start looking at what we value in our society, right? And there are so many different capitals other than financial capital. We all know social capital, intellectual capital, experiential capital, cultural, spiritual, and so on. So when we start bringing these into the equation, and when we start considering these, we get a very different kind of economic structure. And many, many economists over the decades have been working with this, looking at how we can do this. And so what I would like to briefly share with you are a few of these new economic structures. We all know about the sharing and the collaborative economy. This, of course, is working with social capital and using unused resources. We have the economy of creativity, where knowledge and creativity and intelligence are the basis for that. The circular economy, minimizing waste and maximizing use of resources. The sacred economy, beautiful concept where we start to value what is common to us as humanity, our interconnectedness and our reverence for people and place. The economy of generosity, where what we can give to the world rather than what we can take is the basis of that. And finally, the regenerative economy, which is really incorporates all of these in a way and is one step beyond the sustainability concept that we've been working on for a while. So what I'd like to do in the few minutes I have is just touch briefly on three of these and talk about how they might apply to tourism and how we can sort of build on these perhaps in Hawaii to transform our tourism industry. The one I love is the economy of generosity. Right. This really focuses on the shift from greed to generosity. And this is so important because neuroscience and social science both tell us that it's a healthy thing to do. When you're engaged in greedy activities or addicted to something, then dopamine is the chemistry that comes into the body and that drops quickly and you feel really bad. If you're generous, then serotonin, which is a long-term well-being chemical, that is generated. And so we're wired as human beings to be generous. And social science tells us that, we live longer and happier lives when we are. If any of you are interested in learning more about designing for generosity, there's a fantastic TED Talk by Nippon Mehta where he goes into all of the changes that we have to make, and I'll touch on a few of them. But most importantly, as we start to get gifts circulating through a new economy, then new networks are created and new life is brought into the economy. So what would tourism look like if we designed for generosity instead of greed? Well, lots and lots of examples around the world. I'll just touch briefly on a couple. The image you see on the right, which you probably can't read very well, is a generosity menu that a hotel in Siem Reap, Shintamani, has for their guests. You can go to this hotel and you look down and you see for $40 US, I can buy a bicycle for a family down the road. I can get some school attire, or for $800, I can build a well, whatever. So this is presented to the guest. The guest then goes and makes a contribution, meets the family, and guess what? They have repeat visitors. They come back and back. This hotel has done the best in terms of its occupancy percentage. So it's success all around. Amsterdam, which we know is extremely creative, they have published something recently called the Untourist Guide, which is full of generosity experiences for visitors. One fun one I always think is the one where you can go on the canals in Amsterdam fishing for plastic. So you help to kind of pull the waste out of them, but still have a good time. A very famous international restaurant chain in all the capital cities in the world, Karma Kitchen. They encourage generosity by presenting you a bill at the end of your meal of $0. And it's for you to pay forward for the next person. So you're sort of building the concept of generosity. And Intrepid Travel has done some interesting things. So many, many possibilities that we could do. What about the economy of creativity? This, of course, is based on building, intelligence, knowledge, and so on. And it's very important because we're going to start measuring the success of tourism differently. And the amount of adaptation, learning, and diversity is very important. So what would tourism look like if we designed it for creativity? Well, one group of people that I think we need to support to the max are the social entrepreneurs, all entrepreneurs, but particularly social entrepreneurs who are fired with a desire to change the world and also make profit at the same time. Some fantastic examples I don't have time to get into right now. I wrote a book on it recently. Also, designing engaging experiences so that there can be some co-creation between residents and tourists. In Sicily, there's a small village that has done a fantastic job of revitalizing itself with artistic experiences. The whole concept of storytelling, very important. And one of my very passionate things is the redefinition of tourism work and educating people to be change makers in tourism, bring that creativity into our industry in ways that we haven't thought of before. There's so many ways that we can do that. Okay, the third, so we did the economy of generosity, the creative economy, the regenerative economy or regenerative tourism. This is sort of the latest buzzword in one sense, but it's also profoundly and fundamentally important as we start to look at redesigning tourism. Why? Because as Kalani so beautifully said, it replenishes and contributes to the long-term flourishing of communities and ecosystems. And long-term is a very important concept. It's not a quick fix. It's not something that in the next 6 months we can complete. It's an ongoing long-term process. And it looks to living systems for inspiration as opposed to looking at mechanistic systems and production and efficiencies and cost. It's looking at living systems instead. And most importantly, hence it's in red, is it requires all of our stakeholders, yeah, to get a new mindset, to really get on board in a very profound way. Destinations I've known who've gone through a successful shift to regenerative tourism, it's sometimes taken 2 years to get all of the stakeholders, the private sector, the tourists, the residents, everybody on board with this new mindset. So one of the things that I think underlies regenerative tourism is to realize that tourism is not an industry. So often we use that term in Hawaii. You know, the industry needs this, the industry needs that. It's not an industry, it's a system, right? And it's a system that's nested in other living systems. And when you realize that, you make very, very different choices and decisions than when you're trying to silo an industry and just sort of cater to it. But when you realize it reaches out, and we all know that, right? Reaches out to all aspects of our society, then it forces different decisions. It's adaptive and it evolves over time. We don't have static answers, one-time answers. It's an ongoing process of thinking, asking the right questions, and meeting together, and it's holistic and balanced. So this is a very, very important shift that I think we need to make in Hawaii if we're going to transform our tourism, to stop using the term industry and start thinking it as a system. The second one, as Kalani has so fantastically laid out, is that regenerative tourism has to be based in values, the values of stewardship. All of these here are ones that we need to consider, and of course a redefinition of what success is. And I just have to stop here and say that in Hawaii, we are so blessed that we have an indigenous culture that has this rich value set, and John and Kalani are doing great things, bringing them forward, and so the rest of the world, in effect, you know, is jealous, if you will, that we have these, and we have to support John and Kalani bringing it out into the fore. Okay, so that's the second one, and then the third one is that we empower the community, and this is again what John and Kalani are doing with the DMAPs and so on. But you know, it's so important because when you look at regenerative tourism and regenerative economy, we're basing it on regenerative agriculture principles and ideas, right? And in regenerative agriculture, what is it that's so important? It's the soil that's so important, right? It has to be healthy, it has to be nutritious and taken care of for the agriculture. And I always feel like community is like the soil of regenerative tourism, and that is what needs to be nurtured and taken care of. And all our related decisions have to do that. So Āina Aloha, the HTA DMAPs are fantastic. And I'm happy to hear Kalani say that these are going to go on into the future. It's not just a one-time DMAP. It has to be an ongoing situation for it to be regenerative and move forward. And the other thing about regenerative tourism, which is also great, is that the old model of flying in experts to our destination to tell us what to do is not going to work when it's regenerative tourism. We always say the answer is in the room. We know, we live this, right? We know what needs to happen. We just need to be brought together in situations where the conversations can happen. And that already is starting to happen. So we're making great headway in that area. Okay, finally, I'm sure I'm running out of time. I just wanted to touch on something that I think Frank is going to pick up on, and that is as we start to transform tourism, a big part of that is to design experiences for people who come here. We can do all our work on the ground, and then if tourists come here and willy-nilly go and do whatever they want without some guidance and some knowledge and some information, we'll have lost an opportunity. And so, we can design tourism experiences that transform the destination, that transform the visitor, and also transform the host. So a lot of opportunity there. And as I end, I just wanted to end with this quote, which I think captures where we're at right now, perhaps, and that is the hardest things to change are the mindsets that created the systems that need to be changed. So we need to get everybody on board with this. Again, kudos to HTA for what they're doing, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sheldon, for this. This is great, and we'll circle back more to drill down on some of these ideas. I hope later we'll have time to explore these, like what we can do. What are some of these simple activities that encourage a sort of mindful experience of our islands. So moving on to Frank Haas, who's going to wrap things up with our last presentation here. I won't say anything else. Frank, please jump on in.
Well, aloha, everybody. I'm delighted to be here to be part of the discussion about how do we transform Hawaii tourism. What a big subject, but what an important one. The presentation I'm doing now is based on a paper that I wrote in 2019 that was titled, "Can Hawaii Rise from the Ashes of COVID-19 as a Smart Destination?" So I'm going to talk about what is a smart destination and how do we get there. And what you heard from Dr. Sheldon was a beautiful rendition about what is the idea of regenerative tourism. What are the concepts? What do we mean by tourism as a system? I'm going to move beyond that because we need to take those concepts and really get down to implementation. How do we make them work? And there are a lot of applications that are available around the world. There are a lot of best practices and a lot of new thinking that is based on implementation that we need to pay attention to. I would be remiss at the Hawaii Book and Music Festival if I didn't start by suggesting a book. This is a relatively new book by the Center for Responsible Tourism called Overtourism, Lessons for a Better Future. What's great about this book is it's a collection of case studies from around the world. We're not the only people wondering how to manage tourism better. We're seeing places like Venice, like Dubrovnik, like the Columbia River Gorge, struggling with the same thing. So the case studies here are really examples that we can take a look at as models for solving some of the issues that we have here. When I recommend this book, I often take you to management plans and implementation strategies that really are worth pursuing. The topic of using technology to manage tourism is very topical. This just ran in yesterday's New York Times. Venice, overwhelmed by tourists, tries tracking them, using cell phone data and surveillance cameras to help restore the city's old world charm. Or does it just destroy what magic remains? Obviously, Venice is one of the places that's been most affected by volume tourism. And they've turned to technology to try to manage the impacts and restore what Venice had been in the past. I am, as I said, going to be talking about smart tourism. And smart tourism is really the convergence of technology tools that are that can be used by the destination. Tools like big data, robotics, data analytics, near-field communications, a lot of others. and recognizing that the visitor has access to technology in their pocket with smartphones, social media, GPS, wearable technology, and we can use the convergence of technology at the destination and technology in the visitor's pocket to create better and more effective ways to manage tourism impacts, manage tourism behaviors in the destination. I'm going to take you through what was a 50-minute presentation in less than 10, I think. So I'm just going to touch on these things, and then we can talk about it in the Q&A. But what you heard from Kalani and HTA is that the goals of regenerative tourism are different than conventional goals for tourism. We want to attract mindful, respectful visitors. We want to educate them. We want to give them authentic but low impact experiences. We want to alleviate congestion that happens because of tourism and to protect and preserve our natural resources. There are ways that technology can intersect with all of these goals and contribute to solutions, and that's what I'm only going to touch on today. To begin with, we want to attract what we call a higher quality visitor, one that is respectful, one that has behavior that produces a smaller footprint. And that's not new. Big data is a way of doing that and focusing our marketing programs, not just on mass markets, but on specific people, specific types of people is one way to do that. And I have an experience that goes all the way back to 1995 when we partnered with American Express. And the good thing about that partnership is we had data on the American Express cardholders. We knew who stayed at resorts, who traveled in the off season, who spent more money than average. And we were able then to, because we had the names of these cardholders, we were able to see if they came to Hawaii and if they spent more than average. So there was an accountability feature to this. Here we are in 2021, and big data is an incredible part of marketing programs now. And the capabilities are far more robust than they ever have been. And we can now identify people based on their behaviors. You must know that people are collecting data about you and your transactions all the time. And we can use that data to find those people who are the quality visitors. Hotels and airlines have been doing this for some time with revenue management, and I think there's an opportunity for destinations to do the same so that we can attract people who contribute to the economy but have a smaller footprint. Who are these people? How do we identify them in data mining from big data? We can find people who stay in hotels and resorts because they spend more than average. Who travels for cultural experiences? Who is seeking a cultural experience? Who is environmentally aware? Who travels off season? And then you can drill down into other preferred behaviors. We have some attractions here in Hawaii that are unique in the world. How do we attract bird watchers to come visit? How do we attract people who are interested in quilts to see Hawaiian quilts at the mission houses or Bishop Museum? Those are just a few samples of using big data strategically. You can also attract the mindful visitor, the respectful visitor through apps. I'm on the board of Travel to Change. Travel to Change is an organization that has an app that simply links visitors to volunteer opportunities in the islands. Near field communications is a technology that simply communicates between your smartphone or device and a nearby device. It now allows you to provide information to visitors in context and in different languages. There's an example in Europe of a kiosk that has information about sites nearby. And as you approach it, using near field communication, it can tell what language your smartphone uses, and it serves up that information in your own language. Near field communication can provide access to sites. You've probably used it for payment, where you hold your phone over the reader of an NFC, and it takes your payment. You can use it for transportation as payment on the bus. And then you can link it to videos. Kalani showed that video, which is great. And we show it on airplanes and we show it in hotel rooms. But using near field communication, we can serve that up at a trailhead so that it's in context. You can serve up information about beach safety near a beach using this technology. The Internet of Things is a way of improving our management of sites through things like waste bin notification, where the waste bin will actually notify someone if it's time to empty it. We can save energy by using the Internet of Things in hotel rooms. So it senses when you leave the room, turns off the lights, turns off the air conditioning. Venice is using it for crowd sensing. So it knows when a site is getting too crowded, and then they send folks out to manage the crowds. So that's one way of managing the experience. Another is augmented reality. And that's to deepen the experience. This is an example from the Colosseum in Rome, certainly a world-known, renowned site, but it's essentially a pile of ruins. And if you go there, but put on these augmented reality glasses, you can see the Colosseum as it was in its heyday. You can learn about the gladiators. You can learn about the Roman Empire. In addition to just seeing the site. Other ways to deepen the experience for the visitor, artificial intelligence chats with a bot allow you to get better service and better information so that you can learn more about a site before you go. You can learn about the do's and don'ts. You can learn about the sensitivities. We can use artificial intelligence to create custom designed packages or dynamic packages for our visitors. We can use robots at concierge stands to provide comprehensive information about conditions, attractions, and culture in a timely way. We can use technology to manage congestion. One way to do that is to equip rental cars with transponders. If you've traveled on the continent, you may be familiar with something called Easy Pass. When you go on a toll road in the northeast of the United States, the transponder in your car knows when you've passed a point on a toll road, and then it charges you for the toll. Similarly, in California, they have a system using cameras that record your license plate. But what we can do by equipping our rental cars with these transponders is then charge visitors essentially a virtual toll road as they pass certain points. Maybe it's the road to Hana, maybe it's the North Shore on Kamehameha Highway. And then the transponder, which would be registered to a visitor, would have a toll or a fee added to their rental charges when they check out. We can use GPS. Right now, GPS can track in real time visitation to certain sites. The graph on the right is visitation by hour for Diamond Head Trail. But you can create an app that then would alert a visitor when a site is busy. Or if there's an access fee, it could increase the price during busy times. Or if a site is sold out, it could suggest alternatives. Like Diamond Head is busy right now. We've closed it, but have you considered the hike at Makapu'u? We can use technology for natural resource management. I won't take time with this slide except to say that we know that visitors consume resources at a much higher rate than residents. They use 50% more water per day, almost 3 times as much energy, and so on. So how can we change that? We can adopt things like xeriscaping for landscaping, using plants and foliage that require less water. We can install moisture sensing devices so that we're not running our sprinklers at our hotels when we don't need to. And we can look at innovative new technologies like seawater air conditioning to replace the very extensive usage of electricity in air conditioning our resorts and hotels. So I have raced through just a bunch of examples of using technology to better manage tourism. This really came from the development of smart cities. Cities have been dealing with congestion and impacts of too many people and too many small places for a long time. So I think we can learn from that, and we can learn how to apply new thinking, new technology to provide a regenerative tourism base for Hawaii.
Thank you so much, Frank. That's terrific. You kept it right, kept it very brief. And a question I'd want to ask is later, can maybe you and I get together and we can see the whole 1 hour presentation, because I'd love to see it, interview you, talk to you more. And it sounds like there are a lot of good story ideas for us to explore at Civil B with that.
Happy to.
Okay, great. But so now I'm going to start with a few questions, and starting off with one from one of the viewers, and I sort of am summarizing it, but this is from Miwa Ogletree, who asks Kalani, what has HTA done to let tourists know what not to do when they're here? Have you been able to tell tourists, I guess, what not to do and maybe what to do instead when they're here?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a little bit of both. So like I mentioned, the first layer of this is repositioning the Hawaiian Islands in such a way that creates different expectations for a visitor about the Hawaiian Islands and who we are. And so really, I think that's the first step that we can take in trying to educate visitors. The Malama video that I shared with you earlier in our Malama Hawai'i campaign, I hesitate a little bit calling it a campaign because Malama is a value. It's not something that has a start and an end date. But really, we felt like it was important for us as a destination and as HTA to go back to values. And so really what we try to do in all of the branding that we're doing isn't advertising. It's not saying, hey, come here for $1.99 and do whatever you like. We're saying this is a place of deep significance, both cultural and natural and others, and this is how you interact with us. The next layer of that, so Malama Hawai'i is one piece of that strategy. The next is what we call our Kuleana Campaign. And it's really introducing the visitor about their kuleana, their responsibilities that they have when they're in our home on how best to travel pono and what not to do and what to do. And so there's a whole series of messaging that we've done, including things like our marine mammals and monk seals and sea turtles and dolphins and whales and all that stuff that's part of it. But we also talk about reef-safe sunscreen. We talk about single-use plastics. We talk about astute renting. Obviously, short-term rentals are a huge problem for us in the state. And so there's all kinds of messaging that we're actually sharing with the visitor ahead of their travels so that they can be informed and educated to make good decisions when they get here.
Can I add just a little to that? My experience is that the visitors are, by and large, are receptive to that. They want to be responsible travelers, and they often just don't know how to. So a lot of the initiatives you've taken are really going to be well received by visitors, and it's a multi-pronged effort. The other thing I would add is that if you read the coverage in travel magazines about Hawaii, you've seen it shift. It's not just about sunset and surf. It is talking about travel pono. It's talking about how to be respectful when you travel, and that's a major shift.
Yes. Another question, and hopefully we can circle back to this because I do have a follow-up on that point, Frank. But for Dr. Sheldon, one of the things that struck me during the mayoral campaign a while back was our current mayor, when he was campaigning, at one point in an interview said, tourism is an extractive industry. And this term struck me because I've been a business reporter in the past and have covered mining in New Guinea and oil and gas business in the Gulf of Mexico. And those truly are what we consider extractive industries. They're extracting natural resources from the earth. I hadn't really heard of tourism as a extractive industry, but I have heard that term since then by other people who use it quite a bit. Has tourism become an extractive industry, and how does, and if so, how does regenerative tourism that you discuss fit into this idea?
So I think if we use the industry terms, then you could say it's extractive in the sense that it takes resources out of the community in order to be able to operate. But this is the whole idea that we're trying to shift. Tourism has an incredible power to change the place that where people are coming. And that's what our job is, to turn that around from being extractive to being contributory. And when we look at it as a system, we start looking at where are the interactions, where are the touch points, what can be regenerated. And I think an important conversation that we need to have is, what is it in Hawaii that we need to regenerate, that we want to regenerate, and there's a lot of specifics we could come up with, like the hotspots and the culture and so on. But I think diving deep into that would lead us to turn it around. So tourism as an extractive industry is what we're actually trying to get away from, both the extraction and the term industry. And then, when you look at the traditional tourism operations, there's an awful lot of imports that are coming in, right? And we're losing the opportunity to develop economic sectors when we do that. Yeah.
I think if I could, Stuart. Oh,
yes.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I would just say, extractive tourism is definitely the antithesis of what we're going for. And I think oftentimes people also confuse it with being an export, just in terms of the economic model. It is an export for us. But what I think is important to note is that where we're trying to go, not what we have now, but where we're trying to go with regenerative tourism models, actually are supposed to be catalytic to all the things that we want to do, whether it's food security in our ag sector, whether it's all the other things that we want to do, whether it's manufacturing, whatever it may be. Tourism can be a catalyst for it, because like what Dr. Sheldon was sharing earlier is that it's a system within systems. And really the tourism industry that we call it, and thank you, Dr. Sheldon, for that reminder, really is this amalgamation of a bunch of different things that include airlines, hotels, retail, restaurants, all these different sectors of our economy as a whole, but moving together. And so really, I think our vision is really about how does that flip, right? And we can get stuck in what it is now, or we can start to commit ourselves to a new way of thinking and saying, where do we want to go and how do we get there?
Isn't it in the interest of so many of these different parties, though, for things not to be damaging to the environment and the culture of Hawaii, that really makes this place so special, so that people will want to come here? And in that way, is it really fair to call this somehow extractive when so many of the people or parties and entities involved in this really do want the same thing?
Enlightened people within the system see that. They understand that if you mess it up, it's self-destructive. Pauline will recognize this. I always refer people to a book that's out of print. It's Stanley Plogue's book talking about the life cycle, and where things start to degenerate is when the experience starts to decline. And that affects everything else. It affects the community, it affects pricing. That's when people start to discount. That's when visitors start to not appreciate the authenticity of the culture. So we really have to pay attention to to those authentic experiences. And we really have to pay attention as people who run hotels, people who are at HTA and other places, that we need to guard that. We need to, that's one of the motives for regenerative tourism, is to focus on that.
I think
if I could just add one other, sorry, Kalani.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add one other thing to that, in terms of that word extractive, the one thing that, is criticized in terms of extraction is the pulling of so many of the corporate profits out of our state, and that's something that has to be turned around, whether it's through taxation or whatever. But the balance between, what the state gets in terms of revenue versus what leaves our shores has to be put right. And that needs some addressing, I think.
And I think that's where we're trying to go, right? Like, I think fundamentally, like, if you understand tourism and you understand our brand as the Hawaiian Islands, we know fundamentally what supports that brand is our natural resources, is our Hawaiian culture, is our communities, and the way that we take care of one another. Our way of life as local people is really what we are in tourism speak the brand, right? And so we know, and you'll see reflected in our new strategic plan, the first three pillars, which are those three things, which are the reinvestment in people in place, because quote unquote, that's the product. I hate calling it that as a Hawaiian. We're not a product. We're not here to be commodified and sold. But if you use industry jargon, that's really what makes up the product. And so if we don't make reinvestments in it, then what are we branding and what are we quote unquote selling? And again, I'm using my air quotes as strong as I can, because it leaves a distaste in my mouth. But yeah, if you look at it from that model, how do we reinvest in us? Because that's how this stays regenerative in the future and sustainable in the future, not just economically or natural resource wise, but collectively. And that's the big shift we've got to make. It's not the visitor industry and everything else. It's that all of these things are interconnected, and you do something to one thing and it has the ripple effect outside.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I really want to have some time for the panelists to talk to each other and ask each other questions. But in the spirit of that, I'm going to try to ask Frank something that I think Dr. Sheldon mentioned about these encouraging sort of simple, mindful experiences that I really do, in my experience, hosting friends who come here, taking them around. I really do find that these are the things that the people really enjoy most. But how do you do that and encourage that when you're not just a person taking your friend around and playing them music and taking them to certain sites and showing them things and kind of explaining a bit of the history and culture? How do you do this in a commercial setting, Frank?
Well, that's why I'm so interested in this idea of smart tourism, because I can do it when somebody visits me. I take them by the hand and we go find some really cool Hawaii experiences. But when you're talking about, forget what the actual number is, 10 million. If it was 1 million, how do you accomplish that with tourism? And that's where I think technology can come in. I think that's where you can use artificial intelligence to tailor a visitor experience, point them in the right direction, fill them in on the happenings that's going on this week. So we have to find a way to provide that authentic experience, but in a setting that's not just one-on-one. I mean, one-on-one is great when it happens, but it can't happen all the time.
Right. Okay. So anybody else? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, could I add to something to what Frank was saying, which is all great, but I think we have to really get down to what it means as a community to host visitors here, and we can put in place systems where residents and visitors pair up, have picnic in a park somewhere. I mean, it is possible to do that, but it can't be done now because of the volume, because there's a lot of, resistance right now to tourism. But if planned out, I think it would be possible to create places and systems where through technology or whatever, people could come together and a resident could host a visitor.
I think that's part of my point is you can develop a system to do that dating, that matchmaking.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's what Travel to Change does, by the way.
And maybe that's a perfect segue. I'm going to just jump in here. So Frank's on the board of Travel to Change, but the Native Hawaiian Hospitality Association, the Hawaii Tourism Authority, and Travel to Change have recently partnered to host workshops for community-based organizations who want to get involved and offer up those experiences and be part of the Travel to Change website, and being part of that connection is really what we're doing. And that's product development for us, right? So how do we empower our community-based organizations to diversify their revenue streams, get visitors spending dollars in community-based programs that slow that spend down and keep those dollars here longer, and then support micro and small businesses and really our community-based nonprofits. And so I think that, Frank, you're on perfect par with us, where we're already trying to take that and support Travel to Change and NAHA through funding from HTA to be able to make that a reality. I think the other thing we're already making a reality, which nobody knows that we do, and maybe we don't share enough of what we do, but we partnered with a platform called Uber Media. And it is mobile location data from cell phones. And so we collect that data through this third party, and it's all anonymized. We can never tell who it is, but we can tell who's going where and when and how long they're staying there, where they're from. And so we get a lot of good data. But what we did is we actually turned that over to DLNR, the counties and other partners who want that data so that they can make more efficient management decisions, to your point, Frank. They can understand seasonality, time of day, length of stay at a particular point of interest that are all geofenced. And we have over 700 points of interest that we do that at already.
And go to the HTA website, and it's the Symphony dashboard. And
that's one place too.
Just play around with it. Look at it.
Yeah, we'd like to do something. I remember writing about this early on with talking to Jennifer Chun about this. So maybe we can, Jennifer's not there anymore, but would you be the point person, Kalani?
So,
she isn't.
Yeah.
She still lives with us at the Hawaii Convention Center.
Okay.
She is part of the Reed division at DBED, but still works very closely with us.
And research is so critical to all this. We really need to maintain that.
So we and if you folks, this idea of regenerative tourism, as we were just discussing and defining it, would be great. So I'd like to follow up with all of you later for a story, because I see we have, dozens of people watching right now, but we could get this to a broader audience, and I think it would be a really, really terrific story. So I'd love to follow up with you folks. I know we're running out of time, Roger. Can we run over a bit, or should we
give it 5 more minutes?
Okay. So I'm going to encourage one of the panelists to ask another panelist a question. And if you don't volunteer, I'll volunteer you.
I feel like I'm on the table, so please.
Kalani,
Kalani. Oh,
okay. Well, what's on your wish list, Kalani? What's something that's holding things back? I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'd love to hear your take on what one thing could you fix that would really move things forward?
And I'm not saying this to be fluffy. I truly mean this. The one thing holding us back is trust. We know at the Hawaii Tourism Authority that we have a lot of trust to be earned by residents, that they have confidence in what our intentions are, and that we have the integrity to see our vision through. And so to me, the one thing that I'm asking for in presentations like this and many others that we've done is the trust of our community and myself and John and other leaders within HTA to see this vision through. Because if we don't have the support and trust of our residents, none of this matters.
Great. Anyone else?
I would like to ask Kalani. Kalani, what's the current thinking at HTA about volume control?
So I wanted to kind of touch on a few things. Frank, you mentioned toll roads and how that's implemented in other places. One of the nuances is that a lot of our federal highways are federally funded. And if we were to move to a toll road system like the road to Hana, we've heard Ed Sniffen from DOT mention that we would have to refund any federal dollars that have been received for that road, and we would be directly responsible for that road from there on out. And so there's some big choices to be made in implementation of things like that. Pauline, more directly to your question, capacities have to be studied and understood, and that's not our strength. And so we rely on planning departments and people like Danielle Bass at the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development at the state level, but also our county partners. But I encourage people that it's not just the number. We have to think about the number. But often so many residents ask me, okay, so I want a cap and I want it to be X number of million. And I say, okay, now take that next sentence and finish that paragraph. Because if we set a number, and I'm just going to make this up, this is completely just pulled out of my sleeve, 1 million. When we hit that 1 millionth visitor, whether that be in March or in June of a given year, what happens next? And so I encourage us to really think through some of that. How do we sort of truly manage and implement a cap that many people have asked for? And I don't know. I really don't know how that paragraph ends.
Kalani, just to cover something that was way before your time. Pauline and I worked on something back in 2006, struggling with the whole idea of the number.
Every page.
The number, and it's a very complicated task.
And the other thing too is we know that we don't have control of airports, right? That those are federally regulated, and there's a lot of nuance to this.
Open skies.
Absolutely, and so for me, what's more important is whatever the number may be. How do we make sure that other agencies and divisions of the state government and county government and federal government really work together, because we don't have the tools or the authority to do some of this stuff. We have tried to step into spaces where we don't belong, that some people have told us to quote unquote stay in our lane. And so how do we support our sister agencies like DLNR and others to do this work, but also stay in our lane? And so really it's going to take a strengthening and really a whole of government effort to really address this, because if we don't have enforcement, we don't have CIP projects that enhance the infrastructure. I use Ka'ohao as an example. So Ka'ohao is Lanikai today, but it's that same road from 1927 as the earliest record that I could find of that road. It's the exact same road. With all the population growth of residents as well as visitors, our infrastructure is relatively stale. It's relatively the same infrastructure.
I have some thoughts on that, but that's a whole nother
that's a whole nother
session.
I just wanted to add one other thing, if I might, that, Hawaii Green Growth is working in collaboration with HTA quite a lot, and we're starting to get new measures of sustainable tourism, and getting a handle on what's actually happening and measuring it, I think, is a big step forward on the dashboard.
Well, Aloha, I'm a book person, so one of the things that strikes me is that we should have a panel on travel writing about Hawaii, because that's extremely influential. Frank already noted that the travel magazines are changing their rhetoric. But what if we actually trained travel writers to write the way we want them to write? So with that thought, I'm going to say thank you very much for an extremely intense and informative and quite wonderful discussion.
Roger, can I make a book suggestion?
Yes, always.
You know, one thing, right, I missed the opportunity earlier, but one in particular, Detours, a De-Colonial Guide to Hawaii, I think is a great read for folks that want to see a different perspective on tourism. And I encourage people to read that. But I also say this, we do a lot of outreach with those writers. Certainly we can do more.
We have a whole panel on that book in this program.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Tell them when. Tell them when.
Yes, thank you so much for having us, Roger. We really appreciate it, and all the panelists. And again, I'll be bugging you all later.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Mahalo, everyone.
Mahalo.